Agatha Raisin and the disturbingly cheerful widow. In the cosy calm of Carsley, a smile proves far more dangerous than a snarl, and Agatha Raisin senses that a death too neat is hiding something far worse. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Agatha, darling, you're blocking the biscuits. Agatha Raisin turned slowly, her smile already tight, to find Doris Simpson peering anxiously around her elbow, as if biscuits were a finite, natural resource. Agatha stepped aside with exaggerated grace, aware of her heels sinking slightly into the W.I. Hall's treacherous lino. "If Carsley ever starves," Agatha said, "it won't be for lack of short bread." The Women's Institute. Coffee morning was in full, suffocating bloom. Trellis tables sagged under sponge cakes, Victoria sandwiches, and earnest homemade flapjacks. The air hummed with chatter, clinking cups, and the faint competitive tension of women who baked to be admired, not consumed. Agatha had dressed for impact, a fitted cream jacket, silk scarf, immaculate hair. She had intended to dominate the room by sheer presence. Instead, she had been reduced to biscuit-adjacent furniture. "Such a turnout," Mrs. Bloxby said kindly, appearing at Agatha's side. "It's lovely to see everyone rallying." "Yes," Agatha said, "rallying around cake." Before Mrs. Bloxby could reply, laughter burst across the room, not a polite titter, not a restrained chuckle, a full-bodied peal of delight that rang against the notice board and made several heads turn. Agatha felt it like a slap. At the centre of the sound stood Melinda Tripp. Melinda was tall, willowy, and dressed in pale blue, as though auditioning for a painting entitled Cheerfulness Personified. Her blonde hair fell softly around her shoulders. Her smile was wide, white, and unwavering. She was holding a teacup in both hands, as if it were a gift she had personally invented. "Oh, you're all too kind," Melinda was saying. "Truly, Harold would have loved this." Doris Simpson sniffed loudly and dabbed her eyes with a napkin, already soaked through. "It's just so brave," Doris said. "So soon after." "Oh, nonsense," Melinda replied brightly. "Life goes on, doesn't it? One must stay positive." Agatha's jaw tightened. Harold Tripp had been dead 3 weeks. Melinda laughed again, touching Doris's arm in a way that suggested comfort, without inconvenience. "Harold always said I was the stronger one. He hated fuss. Doctors especially." That caught Agatha's attention. Mrs. Bloxby inclined her head gently. "Still, it must have been a shock." "Oh, terribly sudden," Melinda agreed, her tone rehearsed but effortless. "He went in the evening, just like that, sitting in his chair. I found him when I brought his cocoa." A murmur rippled through the room. Agatha took a step closer, drawn against her will. "No doctor?" she asked. Melinda turned, smile fixed. There wasn't time. He'd been so well earlier. Such a peaceful expression. Peaceful? Agatha doubted Harold Tripp had ever looked peaceful in his life. "Well," Melinda continued, "I don't dwell. Dwelling isn't healthy." Agatha opened her mouth, then closed it again as Mrs. Bloxby placed a light hand on her arm. "Agatha," Mrs. Bloxby said softly, "kindness costs nothing." Agatha flushed. Around them, several women watched with interest. Melinda's smile flickered, then returned brighter than before. "I do hope I'm not making anyone uncomfortable," Melinda said sweetly. "I just believe grief shouldn't darken a room." Agatha felt the humiliation settle, slow and hot. She had been outplayed, publicly. She muttered something about air and escaped towards the door, narrowly avoiding a collision with a tray of fairy cakes. Outside, she stood breathing hard, furious at herself for caring. At home later, Hodge greeted her with indifference, leaping onto the counter and knocking over the biscuit tin in a calculated act of betrayal. It burst open, scattering crumbs across the floor. "Oh, splendid," Agatha said. "Join the conspiracy." She bent to clean up, then froze as her neighbour's voice drifted through the open window. "No doctor at all," someone said. "Just found him." Agatha straightened slowly. No doctor. Alone. And a widow far too cheerful for comfort. Hodge stretched luxuriously, unconcerned. Agatha lit a cigarette and stared into the middle distance, already plotting. The next morning, still annoyed and suspicious, Agatha marched straight to Melinda Tripp's cottage and knocked. "You won't stay long, will you?" Agatha said it pleasantly, which was how she knew she was lying. Melinda Tripp's smile widened, as if challenged. "Of course not. I completely understand how busy everyone is." She did not understand. She had already stepped aside to let Agatha into the cottage. Agatha crossed the threshold, with suspicion sharpening her heels. The sitting room was light, pastel, and relentlessly soothing. Cushions in shades of peach and mint were arranged with surgical precision. Fresh flowers crowded every available surface. A framed card on the mantelpiece read, "Every ending is a new beginning." Agatha felt faintly oppressed. "It's all so cheerful," she said. Melinda beamed. "I find it helps." Harold hated gloom. That was the second time she had mentioned what Harold hated. Agatha sat on the edge of a sofa that looked as though it had never been used in anger. The air smelled of polish and something floral that suggested effort. Melinda perched opposite, hands folded, posture perfect. "Tea?" Melinda asked. "No," Agatha said. "Yes, fine." Melinda rose, moving briskly, already talking. "I find routine terribly important after a loss. Keeps one upright, don't you think? People expect widows to collapse." Agatha murmured something non-committal and watched her open cupboards that were labelled teas, biscuits, miscellaneous. That last one worried her. Melinda returned with a tray that could have been photographed. "I've had so many visitors, it's been overwhelming." "Really?" Agatha said. "I hadn't noticed." Melinda laughed lightly, missing the edge. "Everyone's been so kind, though one does sense a little curiosity." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "That happens when someone dies suddenly." "Yes," Melinda said at once. "Sudden, very sudden." Agatha waited. "He was perfectly well that afternoon," Melinda continued. "Tetchy, of course, he always was. But, well, then after supper he went to sit down and that was that." "No doctor?" Agatha asked again, keeping her voice level. Melinda shook her head. lips pursed in remembered regret. There was no point. He was already gone. Peacefully, too. Peaceful again. And the funeral was very quick, Agatha said. People remarked. Melinda sighed. Harold hated ceremonies. He wanted no fuss, no lingering. Convenient, Agatha said, before she could stop herself. Melinda's eyes flickered just briefly. Practical, she corrected. They sat in silence, broken only by the tick of an aggressively modern clock. Agatha felt the weight of cheer pressing in. She stood abruptly. Well, she said, thank you for the insight. Melinda rose with her. I'm glad you came. It's important to be open. Outside, Agatha breathed more easily. At home, she rang Bill Wong. You're fishing, Bill said mildly after she finished. You know that. Yes, Agatha said. And the pond smells funny, Bill sighed. The death was certified as natural, no full post-mortem, but the coroner did a basic toxicology screen on retained samples. That was quick. So was the burial, Bill admitted. Unusual, but not illegal. Agatha hung up, dissatisfied. Moments later, the doorbell rang. Roy Silver swept in, scarf first. I've met her, he announced. She's dreadful. Agatha brightened. You noticed. Darling, no one smiles that much without practice. I brought condolence cards. I wasn't sure which tone to strike. He spread them out dramatically. One read, Thinking of you. Another, Gone, but not forgotten. A third simply said, Oops. Agatha snorted despite herself. She's playing a part, Roy continued. Badly, but perhaps she always did. Or she's hiding something, Agatha said. Roy shrugged. Or she's just unbearable. That night, Agatha listened to her answering machine. One message caught her attention. Agatha, it's Doris, Doris sniffed. Did you know Harold changed his will just before he died? Agatha smiled slowly. Hodge leapt onto the armchair and kneaded it possessively. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen. Widowhood, she thought, came with extras, and she intended to inspect the receipt. He changed it, Doris Simpson said, lowering her voice as if the roses might listen. Just days before, Agatha stopped walking. Doris nearly collided with her back. Changed what? Agatha demanded, though she already knew. The will, Harold's will. That did it. They were halfway down Casserly High Street, Doris clutching her handbag like a flotation device. The news had reached Agatha through tone alone, that quivering mixture of excitement and moral outrage, the village reserved for unexpected inheritances. And let me guess, Agatha said. It was very tidy. Doris nodded eagerly. All to Melinda, well, nearly all. A few bits to charities he never gave tuppence to. Agatha snorted. Death does encourage generosity, especially when one's wife is standing nearby. Doris glanced around nervously. I don't mean to be unkind, but Harold was careful, miserly, really. Controlling, Agatha said. Let's not flatter him. Doris hesitated. He hated doctors. So I've heard, Agatha said. Men like that always do. She left Doris trembling with gossip and drove to Mercester, where the solicitor's office sat above a carpet shop, as though apologizing for its existence. The waiting room smelled faintly of dust and defeat. Mr. Lenton rose when she entered, already flustered. "Mrs. Raisin, You'll be discreet," Agatha said briskly. "I always am." That was untrue, but Mr. Lenton didn't know that. "I'm not asking for documents," she continued. "Just reassurance." Mr. Lenton adjusted his tie. Mr. Tripp was quite firm. About dying? About his wishes. Those wishes involved rewriting his will days before he collapsed alone. Mr. Lenton swallowed. There was no pressure. Agatha leaned forward. Did his wife accompany him? No. Did he seek medical advice beforehand? No. Did you suggest it? He declined. Agatha sat back. How very Harold. Mr. Lenton flushed. Some men value independence. Some men value control, Agatha said. And panic when it slips. The solicitor stood. That is all I can say. Agatha, left with nothing concrete and everything confirmed. Back in Carsley, she encountered Melinda Tripp outside the post office, looking serenely bereaved in tailored black. She was speaking gently to Mrs. Bloxby, one hand resting lightly on her arm. "I find people expect me to crumble," Melinda was saying. "It's exhausting." Mrs. Bloxby smiled. "Grief has many shapes." "Yes," Melinda agreed. "Mine just happens to be upright." Agatha joined them. "Remarkable posture," she said, "especially given the paperwork." Melinda turned. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "Paperwork." "The will," Agatha said lightly. "Very prompt." Melinda's fingers tightened briefly. Harold hated loose ends. "So do spiders," Agatha said. "Still lethal." Mrs. Bloxby cleared her throat gently. Melinda laughed. "You always were sharp, Agatha, only when necessary." Later, Agatha found Charles Fraith outside the Red Lion, sunning himself against his battered convertible. "You look pleased," he observed. "I'm not," Agatha said. "I'm irritated with structure." Charles smiled lazily. "Structure is rarely innocent." "They're saying Harold killed himself." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Did he strike you as imaginative?" "He struck me as afraid." "Afraid men tidy up," Charles said. "Sometimes too neatly." Inside the pub, the whispering had begun. Illness, despair, cowardice. Agatha bristled. "Suicide doesn't rewrite wills." As evening fell, Doris appeared again, flushed with revelation. "I saw her," Doris whispered, "at the chemist, buying herbal remedies, calming ones." Agatha's mouth curved slowly. At home, Hodge occupied her chair like a sentry. Agatha stood by the fire, the pattern finally emerging. Order, control, cheerfulness, all far too deliberate. She muttered, People who smile that much are hiding something, and Hodge stretched, unimpressed. The kettle clicked off, punctual as death, and just as artificial. "I'm not accusing anyone," Agatha said. "I'm inquiring." The woman behind the counter looked unconvinced. They were standing in a small herbal shop just outside Moreton-in-Marsh, the sort of place that smelled faintly of dried leaves and moral superiority. Jars lined the shelves in alphabetical calm. Labels promised tranquility, clarity, balance. Agatha distrusted anything that claimed all three. "I don't discuss customers," the herbalist said, folding her arms. Agatha smiled, a professional smile from her PR days. "Of course not. I'm merely interested in trends." The woman relaxed marginally. Everyone liked trends. "People do turn to natural remedies," the herbalist said. "Especially carers." That word landed. "Carers," Agatha repeated lightly. "For example, sleep aids, calming infusions, stronger tinctures for nerves." "And overdoses?" Agatha asked. The herbalist frowned. "Only if misused. Most accidents are harmless." Accidents. Agatha thanked her and left, stepping back into the daylight, with irritation fizzing just beneath her skin. The pattern was tightening. Calming remedies, evening routines, Harold collapsing after supper. Too neat. Still too neat. Back in Carsley, the village was already vibrating with new information. Agatha barely made it through her gate before Doris Simpson appeared, cheeks pink with urgency. "She's planning a fete," Doris announced. Agatha paused. "A what?" "A charity fete, in Harold's memory." Agatha closed her eyes briefly. "Of course she is." "She says it will help her heal," Doris added, clearly offended on grief's behalf. Agatha opened her mouth, then closed it again. Doris looked dangerously close to tears. "When did Harold fall ill?" Agatha asked gently. Doris sniffed. "After supper. He always ate at 6. Soup, then pudding. Routine was everything." "What kind of pudding?" Doris hesitated. "Stewed fruit. Sometimes custard." Custard carried things very well. Later that afternoon, Agatha phoned Bill Wong. "I'm not panicking," she said. "I'm thinking." Bill made a small, patient sound. "I've asked for the medical notes. And there's nothing dramatic, no diagnosis, but there were complaints, palpitations, fatigue. And stress?" "Yes. And sedatives." Bill paused. "Not prescribed." Agatha hung up with satisfaction and unease in equal measure. The fate announcement arrived by leaflet, hand-delivered. "A celebration of life," it read. "Music, cakes, community." Agatha read it twice, then marched to the kitchen. Hodge was sitting on the counter, observing her with interest. "She's doing this on purpose," Agatha said. "You can see that, can't you?" Hodge blinked slowly. Agatha picked up the phone and dialed. "I'll help," she said when Melinda answered. "Oh." Melinda sounded delighted. "That's so kind." "I know," Agatha said. "I surprise myself." They hung up. Agatha stared at the receiver, then laughed sharply. "Spite is a civic duty," she told Hodge. Preparation meetings followed. WI tables, clipboards, forced cheer. Melinda presided like a benevolent monarch, all smiles and gentle authority. Agatha watched closely. Melinda drank water only. She controlled refreshments. She avoided anything she hadn't poured herself. Health conscious? Agatha asked sweetly. Careful, Melinda replied. After Harold, I don't take chances. Later, Charles Fraith drifted over. You've volunteered, he observed. I've infiltrated, Agatha said. Charles smiled. You always did enjoy a good cause. Not this one. As evening fell, Bill rang again. Harold had a mild heart condition, he said quietly. Undiagnosed officially. Stress and sedatives could have worsened it. Agatha closed her eyes. At home, Hodge stretched luxuriously by the fire. Agatha sat beside him, the house warm and quiet at last. A fate, a smile, a cup of tea. Some remedies, she thought, cured more than nerves. And some resentments were brewed carefully, one evening at a time. Don't put the cakes there. Melinda Tripp's voice was light, musical, and utterly final. Agatha paused with the tray halfway to the table and turned slowly. Melinda stood beneath the bunting like a benevolent dictator, smiling while issuing corrections with surgical precision. They'll melt in the sun, Melinda added, and no one enjoys sagging icing. Agatha lowered the tray, jaw tightening. Carsley has survived worse. I'm sure, Melinda said, but this is a memorial. That word again, memorial, as if it excused everything. The fate sprawled across the village green in orderly cheerfulness. Stalls were arranged just so. White tablecloths fluttered obediently. The brass band tuned up with subdued enthusiasm. Villagers moved about with forced brightness, smiling too much, watching Melinda too closely. Agatha watched back. Melinda shone. There was no denying it. She floated from stall to stall, greeting everyone by name, touching arms lightly, laughing at precisely the right moments. Grief, in her hands, had become performance art. She's enjoying this, Agatha muttered. Charles Fraith, lounging beside the raffle table, glanced over. Some people bloom at funerals, others at fates. She appears to be doing both. Agatha followed Melinda's movements with narrowed eyes. Watch her hands. Charles did. Always busy, always correcting, and never eating, Agatha said. Indeed, Melinda drank only water, poured from her own jug, kept behind the main table. When someone offered her a slice of sponge, she declined with a radiant smile. Later, she said. Always later. Roy Silver arrived late and loudly, wearing sunglasses and an expression of grave, theatrical sympathy. I've come to support the arts, he announced, and the cake. You're judging it, Doris Simpson said nervously. Roy looked delighted. I feel honoured and peckish. The cake competition began with exaggerated seriousness. Roy sniffed, prodded, and tasted with dramatic flourishes. This one lacks soul, he declared. This one lacks sugar. This one lacks a future. Doris looked stricken. Agatha smothered a smile. As the afternoon wore on, tension thickened beneath the laughter. Agatha noticed Melinda intercepting plates, redirecting cups, controlling who served what. Nothing passed without her approval. "Health and safety," Melinda said brightly when Agatha challenged her. "Of course," Agatha replied. "One wouldn't want accidents." Nearby, murmurs stirred. Old resentments surfaced. Someone muttered about Harold being hated. Someone else suggested poison. Agatha stiffened. "He was unpleasant," a woman whispered. "Plenty had motive." Agatha cut in sharply. "Motive doesn't make opportunity." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Nicely put." Later, as the band struck up, Agatha slipped behind the main tent and heard raised voices. "I told you no substitutions," Melinda snapped. "I ran out," a supplier protested. "I was clear," Melinda said, her cheer gone entirely. "You don't improvise." Agatha froze. A moment later, Melinda emerged, smile firmly back in place. "Lovely day," she said, spotting Agatha. "Isn't it?" "Enchanting," Agatha replied coolly. As evening fell, the fete wound down. Villagers dispersed, unsettled, but satisfied. Melinda accepted praise graciously. At home later, Hodge stretched before the fire. Agatha stood, thoughtful, forced smiles, controlled cups, and one sharp crack beneath the cheer. The kettle sighed. So did Agatha. Something, she thought, had finally slipped. "I only meant to see how you were." Agatha knew at once it had been the wrong opening. Melinda Tripp paused in the doorway of her cottage, smile already in place, eyes alert. She stood aside politely, as though nothing could possibly be amiss. "That's very kind of you," Melinda said. "People are so thoughtful at times like this." Agatha stepped inside, resisting the urge to scan the room too obviously. The cheerfulness was still there, but something had shifted. The flowers were fewer, the cushions slightly misaligned. A vase stood empty, as if forgotten. Grief, Agatha thought, did not leave fingerprints, but strain did. "I won't stay long," Agatha said. "I just wondered how you were managing now the excitement's over." Melinda laughed lightly. "Oh, I don't miss it. The fate was exhausting." That was new. Agatha sat when invited, folding her hands deliberately. "You did wonderfully. Everyone said so." "Yes," Melinda replied, a fraction too quickly. "People do like organization." "And control," Agatha added softly. Melinda's smile tightened. "I like things done properly," she said. "That's not a crime." "No," Agatha agreed. "It's just tiring." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not hostile, just strained. Melinda rose and busied herself with the kettle. Her movements were sharper than before, less fluid. She did not offer Agatha tea. "You must find it hard," Agatha said, attempting gentleness. "Looking after Harold all those years." Melinda turned abruptly. "You make it sound burdensome." Agatha held her gaze. "Wasn't it?" The cheer cracked. Only for a second, but it was unmistakable. "He needed me," Melinda said. "He wouldn't have coped alone." "And you coped?" Agatha asked. Melinda's hand clenched on the counter. I did what was necessary. Agatha stood. She had gone far enough. For now. Outside, she nearly collided with Mrs. Bloxby, who was approaching with a basket and an expression of concern. "I hope you weren't unkind," Mrs. Bloxby said gently. Agatha bristled. "I was restrained." Mrs. Bloxby smiled sadly. "Sometimes restraint feels sharp to someone already raw." "Or guilty," Agatha muttered. Mrs. Bloxby met her eyes. "Or innocent." The words lingered unpleasantly. Later, Agatha rang Bill Wong. Her temper slipped, she said. "Just briefly." "That proves nothing," Bill replied. "But I did confirm something." Agatha straightened. "About that mild heart issue," Bill said quietly. "I've confirmed something new. The sedatives weren't random. The levels look measured, regular." Agatha closed her eyes. At home, Hodge jumped onto the sofa beside her, kneading with satisfaction. The house felt unusually quiet. Cracks, Agatha thought, were never loud. They appeared when you pressed gently. Agatha was still standing in her kitchen when the knock came. It was not urgent. It was hesitant, the sort of knock that hoped to be ignored. She opened the door to find Mrs. Barrington from 3 cottages down, clutching her cardigan closed with one hand and guilt with the other. "I don't want to make trouble," Mrs. Barrington said immediately. "Then you've come to the wrong woman," Agatha replied, stepping aside. Mrs. Barrington perched on the edge of a chair, eyes fixed on the rug. Hodge regarded her with polite suspicion from the window-sill. "I didn't think anything of it at the time," Mrs. Barrington said. "But with all the talk..." Agatha waited. Silence was useful. "The night Harold died," Mrs. Barrington continued, "I heard shouting." Agatha felt her spine stiffen. "From where?" "Melinda's cottage. Late. After supper, I'd say." "Shouting?" Agatha repeated. "Or raised voices?" Mrs. Barrington swallowed. "Anger. Real anger. Not grief." Agatha pictured Melinda's smile cracking, just for a second. The clenched hand, the sharp kettle movements. What were they arguing about? Agatha asked. "I couldn't hear words. Just tone. And then nothing. Quiet." Mrs. Barrington looked up, eyes bright with worry. "I thought they'd made up." Agatha smiled thinly. So did everyone. After she'd gone, Agatha rang Bill again. "Argument confirmed," she said. "Night of death." Bill exhaled slowly. "That complicates things. It clarifies them." "You're close," Bill warned gently. "Too close." Agatha glanced at Hodge, now stretched luxuriously across her paperwork. "I'm always close," she said. "It's how I notice cracks." That evening, Mrs. Bloxby stopped by with the casserole. Agatha had no intention of eating. "Be careful," Mrs. Bloxby said quietly. "Suspicion can harden hearts." So can cheerfulness, Agatha replied. Mrs. Blocksby smiled sadly. You may be wrong. I may, Agatha agreed, but I'm rarely mistaken about people pretending. After she left, Agatha sat alone by the fire. The house ticked softly around her. Hodge yawned and rearranged himself. Content. A smile, Agatha thought, was a fragile thing. Press it hard enough, and it always broke. You're assuming anger, Charles Frayth said. I'd start with confinement. They were sitting at Agatha's kitchen table, the remains of an abandoned lunch between them. Charles had his chair tilted back, hands folded behind his head, watching the ceiling as though it might offer insight. I'm assuming shouting, Agatha replied. Anger usually comes with it. Charles smiled lazily. So does desperation. Agatha frowned. That's very poetic and unhelpful. On the contrary, Charles said, people shout when words stop working. Agatha leaned back, arms crossed. You make it sound sympathetic. I make it sound human. She didn't like that. The idea of Melinda Tripp as anything but carefully engineered cheer irritated her. Still, the image refused to leave her mind, a tight smile cracking, a voice raised in a cottage built for silence. Mrs. Barrington said it was late, Agatha said. After supper. Charles nodded. Routine again. He ate at 6, Agatha said. Soup. Pudding. Same every night. Controlled, Charles said. By him. Or her. Agatha stared at the table. By both. They drove later, slowly, along the lane past Melinda's cottage. It looked smaller now, less impressive. Curtains drawn, lights low. Hard to shout loudly in a place like that, Charles observed. Unless you mean it. Agatha knocked. No answer. She's out, Charles said. Or avoiding, Agatha replied. At the Red Lion, Roy Silver was already installed, holding court. Perfect timing, he announced. I was rehearsing. Agatha sighed. Of course you were. Roy leapt to his feet. I've reconstructed the argument. No, Agatha said. Yes, Roy insisted. Picture it. He says, I won't be controlled. She says, Roy raised his voice theatrically, I've given you everything. Several heads turned. Agatha hissed, lower. Roy dropped to a whisper. You owe me. Charles watched, amused. Actually, he said, that's not bad. Agatha glared. You're encouraging him. I'm listening, Charles replied. Different skill. Roy finished with a flourish. I just want freedom. Agatha froze. That word, she said quietly. That's it. Roy blinked. Freedom? She didn't want money, Agatha said. She wanted release. Charles nodded. Emotional imprisonment. Much harder to escape. Agatha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room. People assume poison, she said, but pressure works too. Roy sat down slowly, suddenly serious. And if his heart failed, he said, they'd call it natural. Agatha closed her eyes briefly. Later, alone at home, she replayed the night. Supper. Voices raised. Silence. Hodge jumped onto the table, scattering papers. Agatha barely noticed. Freedom, she thought, always came at a price, sometimes paid by the wrong person. Agatha slept badly, not from fear but from irritation, the sort that crept in when a picture refused to sharpen. She woke with phrases echoing in her head: freedom, routine, after supper, and none of them would line up. By mid-morning, she was walking the lane again, this time alone. Mrs. Barrington's curtains twitched almost at once. "I knew you'd come back," Mrs. Barrington said, opening the door with resigned inevitability. "I kept thinking about it." Agatha stepped inside without ceremony. The sitting room smelled of furniture polish and well-managed lives. "You said shouting," Agatha prompted. "Yes," Mrs. Barrington said. "Not arguing, shouting." "From both of them?" Mrs. Barrington hesitated. "Mostly her." Agatha nodded slowly. "What time?" "After the 6 o'clock news. I remember because the weather came on." Agatha grimaced. "That's oddly precise." Mrs. Barrington looked offended. "I'm a careful woman." Agatha believed her. "Did you hear anything else?" she asked. "A chair," Mrs. Barrington said, "scraped back, and him saying something sharp." "What?" "I couldn't make it out, but it wasn't kind." Agatha thanked her and left with the final piece settling into place. At home, she rang Bill Wong. "That lines up," Bill said quietly. "Stress spike, evening, after eating." "So it could still be natural," Agatha said. "Yes," Bill agreed, "which is exactly why it's dangerous." She frowned. "Dangerous?" "If someone applied pressure knowing his weakness," Bill said, "they'd never have to touch him." Agatha stared at the wall. "And if the argument was deliberate?" she asked. Bill paused. "Then it edges toward culpability." "But not proof." "No," Bill said. "Not yet." That afternoon Charles dropped by, bringing nothing and expecting everything. "You look displeased," he observed. "I dislike tidy explanations," Agatha said, "especially false ones." Charles smiled. "Then don't accept them." "They're saying he collapsed naturally," Agatha said. "Stress, heart." Charles leaned against the counter. "He did. The question is why." She met his gaze. She wanted freedom. And he refused. And she pushed. Charles nodded. "Not to kill, just to break the cage. Agatha swallowed. That's worse. Roy rang later, triumphant. I've spoken to 3 people, he announced. All heard something. None want to admit it. Of course they don't, Agatha said. They prefer accidents. Shall I dramatize the denial? Roy offered. No. Pity. As evening settled, Bill rang again. If you want this reopened, he said carefully, an inquest would be the only route. Agatha felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. That will upset people, she said. Yes, Bill replied, including you. She looked down at Hodge, sprawled on the rug in absolute trust. I don't like bullies, she said, even cheerful ones. After the call, she stood quietly in the kitchen. The kettle sighed. The house held its breath. Night voices, she thought, were always clearer in daylight, and once heard, they never truly went silent. Hodge stretched, turned in a slow circle, and went back to sleep. Agatha remained standing, listening. Now then, Doris, Mrs. Bloxby said gently, you don't have to smile. Doris Simpson smiled anyway. It was a strained upward pull of the mouth that looked as though it hurt. They were in the W.I. hall again, the familiar tables laid out with tea things, and an air of collective unease. Conversation skimmed the surface, polite and brittle. Agatha watched it all with narrowed eyes. Doris clasped her teacup too tightly. I'm fine, she said brightly. Perfectly fine. No point dwelling. Agatha winced. You sound like a pamphlet. Doris's smile flickered, then returned with determination. Melinda says it's important. There it was. Agatha leaned back in her chair, letting the room speak. Around them, women nodded, murmured, corrected themselves when voices dipped too low. Every complaint was quickly smothered beneath reassurance. It was nobody's fault, someone said hastily. We mustn't judge, another added. Agatha leaned forward. Who told you that? A pause followed. Not silence. Hesitation. Melinda, Doris said at last, eyes downcast. She's been very understanding. Understanding, Agatha thought, was doing a great deal of work. After the meeting, Agatha walked Doris home. The lane was quiet, hedges still holding their shape, cottagers watching without comment. He didn't like it, Doris said suddenly. Like what? Agatha asked. The cheerfulness, Doris said. Harold, I mean. He used to say it was exhausting. Agatha stopped. He told you that? Doris nodded. Once. He said he couldn't complain without being told to improve his attitude. Agatha felt something shift. He wasn't allowed to be miserable, Doris continued, or frightened, or angry. Agatha swallowed. No one should be that cheerful. At home she rang Charles. You were right, she said, and it wasn't greed. Rarely is, Charles replied. What is it then? Correction, Agatha said. Constant, smiling correction. Charles hummed thoughtfully. That's a form of power. Later, Agatha found Melinda in the village shop, chatting easily to the proprietor, laughing as if nothing weighed on her at all. You look well, Melinda said when she saw Agatha. Everyone says I'm coping admirably. They would, Agatha replied. You tell them to. Melinda's eyes sharpened, just for a moment. I encourage positivity. You enforce it, Agatha said quietly. A beat passed. Melinda smiled again. People like being told what to feel. Agatha wasn't sure that was true. That evening, at home, she sat with Hodge, curled beside her, the fire low and thoughtful. Cheerfulness, she realized, could be used like a lid. Press hard enough, and nothing underneath was allowed to breathe. The admission came in pieces. Not all at once, not dramatically, just small, uncomfortable fragments offered when people thought they were alone with Agatha. At the post office, Mrs. Turner leaned across the counter and whispered, "He did try once." "Try what?" Agatha asked. "Complain," Mrs. Turner said. "About being tired." She laughed and told him he needed fresh air. At the butcher's, a man Agatha barely knew muttered, "She'd say it was all in his head." That worry was unattractive. By the time Agatha reached the Red Lion, the pattern had settled. Harold Tripp had not been silenced by cruelty or blows or threats. He had been smiled into submission. Roy Silver arrived mid-revelation, scarf trailing, energy undimmed. "I've been thinking," he announced, "about positivity." Agatha eyed him warily. "That's never good news." "It's aggressive," Roy continued. "Cheerfulness. It leaves no room for dissent." He lowered his voice theatrically. "I once dated a woman who corrected my feelings. It was exhausting." Agatha snorted despite herself. "Did you die?" "No," Roy said. "But I considered fainting." Humour aside, the unease deepened. Carsley had allowed it. Smiles were easier than confrontation. Sympathy easier than honesty. That, Agatha realized, was the red herring. Collective guilt felt convincing, comfortable even. It allowed everyone to share blame without anyone carrying it. At home later, Agatha sat at her table, head in her hands. Hodge leapt up and nudged her wrist insistently. "Yes," she said. "You're right. Pity won't solve it." She rang Bill Wong. "I've been reviewing the coroner's toxicology screen," Bill said without preamble. Something didn't sit right. Agatha straightened. "Go on." "The sedatives found in Harold's system were low," Bill said. "Not enough to kill, but enough to weaken. And the levels weren't consistent with an accidental overdose." Agatha closed her eyes slowly. "Too controlled," Bill continued. "Measured." "When?" she asked. "Regularly," Bill said. "Over time." Agatha pictured teacups, evening routines, a smile insisting everything was fine. "So, it wasn't one mistake," she said. "No," Bill replied. "It was a pattern." After the call, Agatha stood quietly in the kitchen. The kettle warmed, patient. The house held steady around her. She felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph. Pity. Melinda Tripp had built a prison out of cheerfulness and lived inside it herself. Hodge stretched, turned in a slow circle, and settled again. Agatha watched him, then murmured, "You're allowed to sulk, you know." Hodge ignored her, and for the first time Agatha understood just how dangerous enforced happiness could be. "You must be exhausted." Agatha said it with warmth, sympathy, and just enough admiration to make it sound sincere. It was the sort of sentence she had once deployed professionally when she wanted people to relax their guard and feel seen. Melinda Tripp looked genuinely pleased. They were sitting at Melinda's kitchen table, which had been laid with quiet precision. 2 cups, a small plate of biscuits, a jug of water placed exactly between them. The room was bright without being cozy, tidy without being lived in. Cheerfulness, Agatha thought, arranged rather than earned. "Oh, I manage," Melinda said lightly. "One learns to," Agatha smiled. "You always were capable." Melinda preened just slightly. "Someone had to be." That, Agatha noted, was not humility. She let a pause settle. Silence, she knew, encouraged people to talk. Melinda filled it almost at once. "After everything, I find routine helps," Melinda continued. "It gives structure. Harold needed structure." Agatha inclined her head. "He seemed very particular." "Very," Melinda agreed. "Meals at the same time, evening habits. He disliked surprises." "And anxiety," Agatha said gently. "That can be hard on the heart." Melinda laughed, relieved. "Exactly. He worked himself up terribly if left alone with his thoughts." Agatha reached for her cup, deliberately unhurried. "So, you helped him stay calm?" Melinda nodded. "I had to, otherwise he'd spiral." "And you were very careful," Agatha said. "With everything." "I had to be," Melinda repeated, more firmly this time. "If I didn't manage things properly, Harold would suffer." There it was again. Manage, not help, not support. Agatha leaned back slightly, giving Melinda room to continue. "I used to prepare his evening drinks," Melinda said. "Nothing strong, just herbal things. Chamomile, valerian, very mild." Agatha's expression remained encouraging. "That's very thoughtful." Melinda smiled. "People underestimate how sensitive men like Harold are." "They do," Agatha agreed. "Carers see things others don't." Melinda brightened at the word. "Exactly." Agatha waited. "Sometimes," Melinda went on, "I'd adjust things slightly, depending on how unsettled he seemed." Agatha tilted her head. "Adjust?" "The amount," Melinda said. "Just a little. One learns what works." Agatha nodded slowly, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "You knew him best." "I did," Melinda said, quickly. "After all those years." "And you never worried," Agatha said, conversationally. That calm could become too much. Melinda hesitated. It was brief, but it was there. Her fingers tightened around her cup. "I never meant—" she began, then stopped. Agatha raised her eyebrows mildly. "Meant?" Melinda laughed, the sound sharper than before. "I mean, one can't be responsible for everything. Harold was a grown man." Of course, Agatha said easily. People make their own choices. Melinda relaxed, reassured. Exactly. Agatha let another pause stretch. Outside, a car passed on the lane. Somewhere nearby, a kettle clicked off. Domestic sounds. Normality. The sort of background noise that made confessions feel safe. You carried a great deal, Agatha said softly. Control can be tiring. Melinda's smile thinned. Someone had to keep things from falling apart. And when he resisted, Agatha asked. Melinda's eyes flickered. He didn't always appreciate my efforts. Agatha nodded. People rarely do. He said I was smothering, Melinda continued, irritation creeping in. That I was always correcting him. And that hurt, Agatha said. Yes, Melinda snapped, then caught herself. I mean, no. I understood he was stressed. Agatha watched the cheer slip, just slightly. You were protecting him, she said. Melinda seized on it. Exactly. And you never intended harm. Never, Melinda said firmly. I only wanted peace, Agatha smiled. Peace can be powerful. Melinda smiled back, relieved again. It can. Agatha rose at last, smoothing her jacket. Thank you for trusting me. Melinda stood too. It helps to talk. You understand. Agatha met her gaze. I do. Outside, Agatha walked slowly down the path. Heart steady, thoughts racing. She had not accused. She had not pressed. She had not frightened. She had listened. And Melinda, soothed by sympathy, had begun to explain. Agatha did not go straight home. She walked the long way round Carsley, past cottages that knew too much and said too little. The village was busy with its own normality. Doors opened, children shouted. Someone laughed too loudly. Life, infuriatingly, went on. It always did. At the corner by the green, Doris Simpson emerged from a gate, clutching a folded cardigan. Oh, Doris said. Agatha, I was just breathing, Agatha said. It's popular today. Doris nodded, relieved to be told what she was doing. Melinda's been very calm lately. Yes, Agatha said. She prides herself on it. She says she never did anything wrong, Doris continued. Just tried to help. Agatha stopped walking. Did she say that? Doris nodded earnestly. She told me herself this morning. Doris lowered her voice. She said she'd only ever adjusted things to keep Harold settled. Nothing harmful. Adjusted. The word again. Agatha smiled thinly. Thank you, Doris. Doris flushed. I hope I haven't said too much. You've said exactly enough, Agatha replied. At home, Hodge greeted her with suspicion and hunger. She fed him, then stood staring at the kettle until it boiled of its own accord. She rang Bill Wong. She admitted it, Agatha said, without preamble. Bill did not interrupt. Not directly, Agatha continued, but clearly. She controlled his drinks, nightly, adjusted dosage depending on mood. Bill exhaled slowly. That aligns with the lab findings, so it wasn't accidental, Agatha said. No, Bill replied. It was consistent. Agatha leaned against the counter. She claims ignorance, says she never meant harm. That may be true, Bill said. Intent is complicated, but responsibility isn't. No, Bill agreed. It isn't. There was a pause. If we proceed, Bill said carefully, it will mean formal steps, statements, a reopened review. It will upset Carsley, Agatha said. Yes, Bill replied. It will. Agatha looked down at Hodge, now washing one paw with meticulous attention. Then let it, she said. They've been comfortable too long. Later that evening, Charles Fraith appeared, leaning in her doorway like a man expecting entertainment. You look satisfied, he observed. I'm not, Agatha said. I'm resolved. Charles smiled faintly. That's more dangerous. She told me, Agatha said. Not everything, but enough. Charles nodded. People confess when they think they're being understood. She thinks she was kind, Agatha said. That she knew best. And did she? Agatha hesitated. About his fears? Probably. And about his limits? Agatha shook her head. No. Charles crossed the room and poured himself water without asking. That's where carers slip. They stop seeing the line. She pushed until something broke, Agatha said quietly. Yes, Charles agreed, and then told herself it was inevitable. Roy rang just after Charles left. I've heard, Roy said. She's saying it was all very tragic. No one's fault. Agatha snorted. Fault doesn't disappear because it's inconvenient. Are we doing this? Roy asked. Properly? Yes, Agatha said. Quietly. Roy paused. That's your version of quietly? Very, Agatha replied. After the call, the house settled around her. The fire ticked, the kettle cooled. Hodge leapt onto the armchair and arranged himself with finality. Agatha sat opposite him, hands folded. Melinda had not shouted her confession. She had smiled it out, smoothed it over, wrapped it in concern and called it care. That, Agatha thought, was the most dangerous kind. Bill's message arrived on the answering machine just before midnight. I'm preparing the paperwork, his voice said. We'll move carefully. Agatha stood and switched off the light. Hodge stretched, yawned, and turned his back on the world. Agatha watched him for a moment, then muttered, You're allowed to sulk. No one corrects you. Hodge did not respond, and for once neither did Agatha. The next afternoon Bill Wong came with Agatha to Melinda Tripp's cottage. I don't understand why everyone's so serious all of a sudden. Melinda Tripp said it lightly, but her eyes were already calculating. They stood in the sitting room of her cottage, the same room that had once felt aggressively cheerful. Now it felt brittle, The flowers were fewer, the cushions still aligned but no longer convincing. Agatha remained standing. "This won't take long," she said. Bill Wong stood slightly to one side, hands relaxed, posture careful. He was not here as a friend, he was here as something more precise. Melinda's smile held. "Is this about the paperwork? I was told it might be reviewed." "It's about the drinks," Agatha said calmly. Melinda blinked. "The drinks?" "The evening ones," Agatha continued. "The ones you adjusted." A pause followed, small but real. "I told you," Melinda said. "They were harmless." "Measured," Bill corrected gently. "Not harmless." Melinda laughed too quickly. "Herbal remedies can't kill." "No," Bill said. "But they can weaken, especially combined with stress." Agatha watched Melinda's face, not the smile, the tension beneath it. "You were very consistent," Agatha said. "Every evening, same time, same care." "I was looking after him," Melinda snapped, then stopped herself. "I mean, of course I was." "You controlled the dosage," Bill said. "You've admitted that." Melinda's smile began to slip, fraction by fraction. "I adjusted it, that's all." "And when he resisted?" Agatha asked. Melinda turned on her. "You don't know what it was like." Agatha nodded once. "Tell me." Melinda's breath came faster. "He worried constantly. About money, about illness, about losing control. And you hated that," Agatha said quietly. "I hated watching him suffer," Melinda replied sharply. Bill spoke again, voice steady. "You increased the sedatives on difficult evenings." Melinda's hands clenched. "I wanted peace. For him," Agatha said. "For both of us," Melinda snapped. The cheer was gone now. In its place sat irritation, fear, something dangerously close to relief. "You knew his heart was weak," Bill said. Melinda shook her head. "I knew he was fragile." "And you pushed anyway," Agatha said. Melinda stared at the floor. "I never wanted him dead." Agatha believed her. "That's the tragedy," Agatha said softly. Melinda looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I just wanted quiet, for once." Silence filled the room. Not the peaceful sort Melinda had chased, but the heavy kind that arrived when words ran out. Bill folded his notebook closed. "We'll need to continue this formally," he said. Melinda's smile tried to return, failed. "This is all very dramatic," she said weakly. "People die of heart trouble every day." "Yes," Bill said, "but not always helped along." Agatha felt the room shrink. Cheerfulness had nowhere left to hide. Melinda sank into a chair, suddenly smaller. "I was careful," she whispered. "I always was." Agatha looked at her, really looked this time. Care, she thought, could suffocate just as surely as neglect. Melinda did not cry. That surprised Agatha more than anything else. She sat very straight in the chair, hands folded in her lap, as though posture alone might hold the world in place. The room felt oddly exposed, without the usual brightness to shield it. "I didn't plan anything," Melinda said at last. "There was no moment where I decided." Bill nodded. "Most of these things don't have one." "I just adjusted," Melinda continued, "night by night, according to how unsettled he was." Agatha remained silent. "He would pace," Melinda said. "Ask the same questions. Again and again. He'd say I was making things worse by worrying him." Her mouth tightened. "So I stopped the worry." "You managed it," Agatha said. "Yes," Melinda replied quickly. "I managed him." The word echoed unpleasantly. "I never gave him more than I thought was safe," Melinda said. "I read everything. I measured carefully." "And when it wasn't enough?" Bill asked. Melinda's fingers twisted together. "I didn't think—" "No," Agatha said gently. "You felt." Melinda looked up sharply. "I felt trapped." Agatha believed that too. "He wouldn't let go," Melinda said. "Not of his routines, not of me. Every fear became my responsibility." "And you wanted freedom," Agatha said. "Yes," Melinda whispered. "Just a little quiet." Bill closed his notebook again, slower this time. "You understand," Melinda said suddenly, turning to Agatha. "You of all people." Agatha flinched despite herself. "You know what it's like," Melinda pressed, "to carry other people's expectations, to be blamed for their discomfort." Agatha held her gaze. "I know what it's like to want control." Melinda nodded eagerly. "Then you see—" "And I know," Agatha continued, "that control doesn't give permission." The words landed softly. They still hit. Melinda sagged back in the chair, the fight drained out of her. "I never meant to hurt him," she said again. "He just stopped." Bill's voice was careful. "Intent matters, but so do actions." "So what happens now?" Melinda asked. Bill glanced at Agatha, then back at Melinda. "We proceed formally. There will be statements, a review, possibly an arrest." Melinda closed her eyes. "People will hate me." Agatha shook her head. "They'll be confused. That's worse." Melinda laughed weakly. "They liked me." "They liked being told everything was fine," Agatha said. "That's different." There was a knock at the door, procedural, unemotional. Bill rose. "We'll need to go." Melinda stood slowly, smoothing her skirt by habit. The gesture looked automatic now, detached from purpose. As they stepped outside, Agatha paused on the threshold. "Melinda," she said. Melinda looked back. "You weren't evil," Agatha said. "You were afraid." Melinda nodded once. So was he. Bill led her down the path. The village beyond looked unchanged. Sun on stone, doors open, ordinary life continuing, indifferent as ever. Agatha watched until they were gone. At home, the house felt unusually calm. Hodge lay stretched by the fire, perfectly unconcerned. Agatha sat opposite him, suddenly very tired. "You see," she murmured, "cheerfulness doesn't count as kindness." Hodge opened one eye, then closed it again. The kettle sighed softly in the kitchen, and for once Agatha let the quiet stay. Is it true? Agatha had not even reached the post office before the question found her. Mrs. Turner stood half in, half out of the doorway, clutching a newspaper she had not read. Her eyes were bright with the particular mixture of alarm and curiosity Carsley specialized in. Yes, Agatha said. It's true. Mrs. Turner inhaled sharply. Well, I never. That's because you weren't married to her, Agatha replied, and continued walking. The village had not erupted. That somehow made it worse. No shouting, no confrontation, just a soft, collective intake of breath as people absorbed the idea that Melinda Tripp had been taken away quietly, efficiently, without drama. Doors opened a fraction longer than necessary. Curtains twitched with professional discretion. At the WI Hall, the reaction was muted but intense. She always seemed so capable, someone murmured. So organized, another added. Doris Simpson sat very straight, hands folded, as if posture alone might absolve her. I feel dreadful, she said. I should have noticed. Agatha said nothing. She had noticed. That had been her mistake. Mrs. Blocksby moved through the room with quiet competence, distributing tea and reassurance in equal measure. We must remember, she said gently, that none of us knew everything. Roy Silver, leaning against the notice board, snorted. Optimism strikes again. It's always the cheerful ones. Mrs. Blocksby gave him a look. Roy. What? Roy said. I've long distrusted relentless positivity. It leaves no room for honesty. Agatha almost smiled. The next morning, the Red Lion was full of careful conversation. The word arrest was avoided. Instead, people said taken in or asked to help with inquiries. She didn't look the type, a man said, as if crime came with a uniform. Agatha sat at her usual table, listening rather than participating. This was the phase she disliked most, the reshuffling of memory, the quiet rewriting of past interactions. She was always correcting him, someone said. Yes, but kindly, another replied. Kindness, Agatha thought, was a dangerously flexible word. Charles Fraith joined her, sliding into the opposite chair with his usual lack of ceremony. You look unsatisfied, he observed. I am, Agatha said. Everyone wants this to be neat, and it isn't. No, she said. It's messy and uncomfortable. Charles nodded. Those are the ones people rush to tidy. Roy appeared again, waving a glass. I've decided optimism should come with warning labels. Agatha glanced at him. You're enjoying this. I enjoy commentary, Roy corrected, not consequences. Back home, after Bill's call, the silence pressed harder than usual. Hodge followed Agatha from room to room, suspicious of the change in rhythm. They're all shocked, Agatha said aloud, as if cheerfulness were a guarantee. Hodge jumped onto the armchair and began washing, unimpressed. Agatha stood at the window, watching the lane. Life continued. Children passed. Someone laughed. The world adjusted with indecent speed. She did not feel victorious. She felt unsettled. The guilt did not arrive all at once. It crept, Agatha encountered it in fragments as she moved through Carsley that afternoon, like an unpleasant draught no one wished to acknowledge. At the bakery, Mrs. Turner pressed an extra bun into her hand and said, "For later," with the air of someone paying penance. At the post office, the queue fell abruptly silent when Agatha entered, then resumed in careful murmurs. "We all thought she was coping so well," someone said. "That was the trouble," someone else replied. Agatha said nothing. She had learned that silence unsettled people far more than accusation. Outside the vicarage, Mrs. Blocksby caught up with her, breathless but composed. "You did the right thing," Mrs. Blocksby said. Agatha looked at her. "Did I?" Mrs. Blocksby smiled sadly. "Truth is rarely tidy. That doesn't make it wrong." Agatha nodded, unconvinced. At the Red Lion, Roy had gathered an audience. "I blame slogans," he announced. "They're never honest. Stay positive is just, don't complain in a brighter font." A ripple of uneasy laughter followed. Doris Simpson sat nearby, twisting her napkin. "I should have said something," she murmured. "Yes," Roy said briskly, "but then you'd have been thought unkind. Can't have that." Doris flushed. Agatha intervened. "We all chose comfort." Roy raised his glass. "To comfort, the enemy of curiosity." Charles watched from the bar, expression unreadable. Later, as dusk edged into the village, Agatha walked home alone. The cottages glowed softly, windows lit, fires burning. It was all unbearably normal. At home, she poured herself a glass of wine and did not drink it. Hodge leapt onto the table and sniffed disapprovingly. "I know," she told him. "It's not celebratory." She sat finally and allowed the weight of it to settle. Melinda had not been monstrous. That was the difficulty. She had been frightened, controlling, desperate for quiet. The village had preferred her cheerfulness to Harold's discomfort. Agatha included. That, she suspected, was the real indictment. The phone rang. "Bill Wong." "She's been charged," he said quietly. "She's been remanded for now, until the next hearing." Agatha closed her eyes. "How did she take it?" "Calmly," Bill replied. "Still calm." Agatha exhaled. "Of course." There was a pause. "You all right?" Bill asked. "No," Agatha said honestly. "But I will be." After the call, she sat in the armchair, staring at the fire. Hodge jumped up beside her, turned twice, and settled with a satisfied grunt. "You see," she murmured, "it wasn't wickedness." Hodge purred. "It was correction," Agatha continued. "Smiling pressure, everyone agreeing it was for the best." Hodge stretched, unconcerned. Agatha watched the flames dance and thought of how easily a village could excuse what it found comfortable, how cheerfulness could pass for kindness, how control could masquerade as care. She did not feel clever, she did not feel pleased. She felt older. The kettle clicked softly in the kitchen, forgotten. Agatha did not move to silence it at once. "Anyway," the word landed heavily in the WI hall. Agatha looked up from her chair as Doris Simpson said it, briskly and with purpose, as if trying to sweep something unpleasant under the rug with a single syllable. "Anyway," Doris repeated, louder this time, "the spring fete will need a new rota." A murmur of agreement followed. Chairs scraped, papers rustled. The moment passed. Casserly, Agatha realized, had begun to move on. The hall looked unchanged. Same trestle tables, same slightly stale smell of tea and polish. Only the empty chair at the far end hinted that something had happened at all. "She always did keep things organized," someone said. "Yes, well," another replied. "One can't dwell." Agatha folded her arms. Dwelling, she knew, was deeply unfashionable. Mrs. Blocksby moved gently through the room, smiling, murmuring reassurances. She paused beside Agatha. "They're coping in their own way," she said quietly. "By pretending it was a bad dream," Agatha replied. Mrs. Blocksby did not contradict her. Later, at the Red Lion, the tone had shifted again. The shock had worn thin, replaced by something more practical. "She'll sell the cottage, I expect. Shame, lovely light. I always thought she tried too hard." Roy Silver, holding court near the bar, raised his glass. "And thus, history is rewritten." Agatha joined him. "They're already polishing the memory." Roy nodded. "Nothing terrifies people like discomfort without a villain." "She was the villain," Agatha said. Roy grimaced. "Too subtle. Much better if she'd shouted." Agatha smiled despite herself. Charles Fraith watched from his usual corner. "You look dissatisfied," he said when she joined him. "I was hoping for reflection," Agatha said. "Not refurbishment." Charles sipped his drink. "Villagers are like that. They redecorate emotionally." Outside, life resumed with alarming enthusiasm. Children raced down the lane. Someone argued cheerfully over a hedge. The postman whistled. Agatha walked home slowly, feeling oddly out of step. At her cottage, Hodge greeted her with loud accusation. She fed him, then leaned against the counter, suddenly weary. The phone rang. "Just checking in," Bill Wong said. "You surviving?" "Barely," Agatha replied. "They've moved on already." "Yes," Bill said. "They usually do." She sighed. "It feels wrong." Bill paused. "Justice doesn't always come with comfort." After the call, Agatha sat at the table staring at nothing. Hodge jumped up and began inspecting her papers. "You'd have liked her," Agatha told him. "She would have corrected your posture." Hodge yawned. That evening, Doris Simpson knocked, holding a plate. "I thought you might like some sponge," Doris said. "It's not cheerful sponge, just ordinary." Agatha took it. "Thank you." Doris hesitated. "We all thought she was helping." "Yes," Agatha said. "That's the problem." Doris nodded, eyes troubled. "I suppose kindness can be loud." Agatha watched her go, thinking how neatly that put it. Later, the kettle boiled itself dry. Agatha did not rush to stop it. The house felt quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. Outside, Carsley settled into evening, relieved to have its routines back. Agatha was not relieved. Normality returned in installments. The first sign was the notice board. By the following midweek, the pinned paper announcing Melinda Tripp's charity initiatives had been replaced by a flyer for a gardening talk. Someone had written "All welcome" in neat pen, as if reassurance might prevent questions. At the shop, Agatha overheard a woman say, "Well, it's such a shame," with a tone that suggested inconvenience rather than grief. Another replied, "At least it's over." Agatha bought her milk and left before she said something unforgivable. By Friday, the gossip had shifted its weight. Melinda's name was spoken less often. When it did appear, it was softened by qualifiers. She meant well. She was under pressure. Anyone might have done the same. Agatha stopped short in the lane at that. Anyone. She continued walking, jaw tight, until she reached the vicarage. Mrs. Blocksby was in the garden, clipping roses with careful attention. "You look cross," Mrs. Blocksby observed pleasantly. "I am," Agatha said. "They're excusing it." Mrs. Blocksby snipped a stem. "They're protecting themselves." "By pretending they couldn't have known?" "Yes," Mrs. Blocksby said gently. "And by pretending kindness never harms." Agatha folded her arms. "It did harm." Mrs. Blocksby met her gaze. "Yes." They stood in silence for a moment, the garden breathing around them. "People confuse kindness with comfort," Mrs. Blocksby continued. "Real kindness often unsettles. It asks for listening, for restraint." "And for letting people be unhappy," Agatha said. Mrs. Blocksby smiled. "Especially that." Later, at the Red Lion, Roy delivered his final verdict. "I've decided cheerfulness should require consent," he announced. Agatha raised an eyebrow. "You'll never get the paperwork approved." Roy grinned. "I live in hope," Charles beside him said quietly. "Villagers don't like ambiguity." "They don't like guilt either," Agatha replied. "No," Charles agreed. "That's why they tidy it away." At home that evening, Agatha sat by the fire, finally drinking the wine she had poured hours earlier. Hodge occupied the armchair, blissfully indifferent to moral reckoning. "You know," she said to him, "they'll remember this as unfortunate, not instructive." Hodge flicked an ear. She thought of Harold Tripp, of evenings smoothed and quieted until nothing remained, of how easily care could become correction. The phone rang once more. Bill Wong. "Just wanted to say," he said, "yeah, you did what needed doing." Agatha exhaled. "That doesn't make it satisfying." "No," Bill said, "but it makes it right." After the call, she sat for a long time, listening to the fire settle. Outside, Carsley hummed with its restored rhythms. Agatha did not feel lighter. She felt clearer. Mrs. Blocksby's words returned to her. Kindness that unsettles. She suspected she would remember them longer than Carsley would remember Melinda Tripp. Hodge stretched, yawned, and moved closer to the warmth. Agatha watched him, then murmured, "At least you're allowed to sulk." Hodge purred, unapologetic. The kettle sighed in the kitchen. This time Agatha rose to silence it. "You don't have to be so sharp, you know." The remark was delivered lightly, but Agatha felt it land between her shoulders. She turned from the sink to find Mrs. Blocksby standing in the doorway of the vicarage kitchen, hands folded, expression calm, in that infuriatingly gentle way. "I do, actually," Agatha said. "Otherwise nothing ever gets said." Mrs. Blocksby smiled. "That may be true, but sharpness has a cost." Agatha snorted. "So does politeness." They sat at the small table, cups between them, steam rising quietly. The kitchen smelled of soap and something faintly floral. Comforting, if you liked that sort of thing. "I keep thinking," Mrs. Blocksby said, "about how easily we excuse behaviour when it's wrapped in concern." Agatha leaned back. "Concern's very fashionable." "Yes," Mrs. Blocksby agreed. "And cruelty doesn't always look cruel." Agatha felt the words press uncomfortably close. Later, walking home, she replayed the conversation against her will. She disliked reflection. It made her feel older than she already was. At the post office, she caught her own tone sharpening unnecessarily. "No, I don't want stamps," she snapped. "I want the parcel." The woman behind the counter stiffened. Agatha sighed. "Sorry." The apology tasted odd. Outside she paused, irritated with herself. She had always prided herself on not being falsely nice, on saying what others wouldn't. But lately, the line between honesty and abrasion felt thinner. At home, Hodge lay sprawled across her chair with deliberate entitlement. "Get down," Agatha said. Hodge opened one eye, unmoved. "Fine," she muttered, perching on the edge instead. She lit a cigarette, then stopped herself, crushing it out unused. Even her vices felt tiresome. The phone rang. "Just checking in," Bill Wong said. "You sounded thoughtful earlier." "That's because I was," Agatha replied. "It's unpleasant." Bill chuckled softly. "It happens." "I keep wondering if I push too hard," she said. "If I enjoy being right more than being kind." Bill was quiet for a moment. "You're not unkind. I'm not gentle either." "No," Bill agreed. "But gentleness isn't always honest." Agatha stared at the wall. Melinda thought she was being kind. "Yes," Bill said. "And she never questioned it." Agatha frowned. "Are you saying I should question myself?" "I'm saying you already are," Bill replied. "That's the difference." The line went quiet. Agatha absorbed that reluctantly. Later that afternoon she encountered Roy Silver on the lane. "You look pensive," he observed. "Dangerous condition." "I'm reviewing my personality," Agatha said flatly. Roy winced. "I'd advise against it." "Too late," Roy grinned. "Well, if you decide to be nicer, do let me know. I'll miss the insults." She smiled despite herself. As evening crept in, Agatha found herself tidying without purpose, straightening cushions, reordering papers, small acts of control. The house felt too quiet. She sat at the table, hands folded, thinking of Melinda's smile, of her own sharp edges, of how easily one could slide from correction into coercion. That, she realized, was the real danger. Hodge jumped down at last, stretched, and padded over to her, brushing against her leg. Agatha looked down at him. "Well," she said, "at least you don't pretend to be nice." Hodge flicked his tail. Agatha laughed softly, the sound surprising her. Agatha woke the next morning with the uneasy sense that something had shifted. Nothing dramatic, no revelation, just a faint discomfort, like wearing a shoe that suddenly no longer fitted. She stood in the kitchen staring at the kettle while it boiled, then turned it off before it reached a proper roar. The house felt oddly attentive, as though listening. She poured tea she did not particularly want, and sat at the table, hands wrapped around the mug. Outside, Carsley carried on with its quiet routines. Someone reversed too slowly. A gate banged. Life resumed with its usual lack of sensitivity. Agatha found she did not resent it. At mid-morning, Bill Wong appeared at her door, not in uniform, holding a paper bag. "I come bearing pastries," he said. "A peace offering." Agatha eyed the bag. "You're very confident." "I've learned," Bill replied, stepping inside. "Food first. Philosophy later." They sat at the table, the bag between them. Bill unpacked the pastries with care. "You've been thinking," he said. "Yes," Agatha replied. "And I don't recommend it." Bill smiled faintly. "You're allowed to examine yourself without rewriting the whole thing." Agatha snorted. "That's not how I do anything." "I know," Bill said gently. She picked at a pastry. "I keep wondering if I enjoy the confrontation too much." Bill considered that. "You enjoy clarity and being right." "Yes," he agreed. "But those aren't crimes." Agatha frowned. Melinda thought she was right too. Bill met her gaze. She never doubted herself. Agatha was quiet. "You doubt yourself," Bill continued. "Often. Loudly. That's not reassuring." "It should be," Bill said. "Certainty is what gets dangerous." Agatha leaned back, exhaling slowly. "So what? I just keep being sharp and hope it balances out." "No," Bill said. "You keep asking whether you're sharp or cruel. That's the line." She considered that. Reluctantly. After Bill left, Agatha walked into the village. The gossip had softened further, settling into anecdote rather than outrage. "She always meant well," someone said. Agatha passed without stopping. At the WI Hall, Mrs. Bloxby was arranging flowers. With quiet concentration, she looked up and smiled. "You look steadier," she observed. Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Do I?" Mrs. Bloxby nodded. "You've stopped bristling." Agatha huffed. "Don't make a habit of noticing." Mrs. Bloxby laughed softly. "I won't." They stood together for a moment, companionable. "You know," Mrs. Bloxby said, "niceness is often about avoiding discomfort." Agatha nodded. "I've noticed." "Kindness," Mrs. Bloxby continued, "is about allowing it." Agatha absorbed that in silence. That evening, she found herself alone with her thoughts again. But they no longer pressed quite so hard. She poured a glass of wine and drank it this time, slowly. Hodge lay curled in his chair, utterly untroubled by moral nuance. "You don't worry about being nice," Agatha told him. Hodge flicked an ear. "You just exist," she said, annoyingly. Hodge opened one eye, unimpressed. Agatha smiled faintly. She thought of Melinda, of Harold, of Carsley smoothing itself back into comfort, of her own sharp tongue and sharper instincts. She had always believed sharpness was honesty. Perhaps, she thought now, it was also armor. The fire settled. The kettle cooled. Agatha sat back, letting the quiet hold. She did not resolve to be nicer. She resolved to be attentive. It felt like enough. Hodge stretched, yawned, and moved closer to the warmth. Agatha watched him, then murmured, "At least you never pretend to be better than you are." Hodge purred, entirely unapologetic, and for once Agatha let herself be the same. "You'd think someone had moved house," Roy Silver remarked, surveying the notice board. Agatha followed his gaze. The old flyer for Melinda Tripp's charity initiatives was gone at last. In its place sat a bland announcement about a second-hand book sale, handwritten and entirely without enthusiasm. "That's exactly what they think happened," Agatha said. "A change of occupancy. Nothing more." Roy sniffed. Villagers are marvelous at editing. Carsley had settled into its preferred rhythm. Not celebration, not mourning. A careful middle ground in which nothing was discussed too openly and everything was considered resolved enough. At the WI Hall, Doris Simpson was briskly reorganizing the cupboards. "We'll need to restock the biscuits," she said. "People are coming again." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "They stopped?" "Briefly," Doris admitted, "but one can't stay away forever." Agatha thought of Harold Tripp and wondered how long his absence would be felt. She suspected not very. Mrs. Blocksby arrived with her usual quiet efficiency, smoothing over minor tensions before they had time to grow. A week later, after a brief hearing, the news travelled fast through Carsley. "Melinda's been released on bail and is staying nearer Cheltenham," Mrs. Blocksby said softly to Agatha, as if sharing parish news. "Awaiting trial," Agatha replied. "Yes," Mrs. Blocksby said. She sounded calm. Agatha grimaced. She would. Outside, the village carried on. Someone argued cheerfully about parking. A delivery van reversed with too much confidence. Life, relentless and incurious, continued. Agatha walked home alone, the sound of her heels sharp on the stone path. She felt neither relief nor satisfaction, just a vague sense that something had been put back in place without being properly examined. At her cottage, Hodge greeted her with loud complaint. "I'm late," she said. "I know." Hodge accepted this explanation without forgiveness. The phone rang while she was feeding him. "Just an update," Bill Wong said. "Everything's proceeding as expected." "That's what worries me," Agatha replied. Bill chuckled softly. "Order is comforting." "Comfort can be dangerous," Agatha said. "Yes," Bill agreed. But chaos rarely solves anything either. She sighed. So we settle. We live, Bill corrected. Later, Charles Fraith appeared, leaning against her doorway as if it belonged to him. You look pensive, he observed. I'm wondering what people will remember, Agatha said. Charles smiled faintly. They'll remember being unsettled. They won't remember why. Agatha snorted. That sounds accurate. Villages don't repair, Charles continued. They restore appearances and leave the cracks underneath. Precisely. As evening approached, Agatha found herself tidying without purpose, straightening books, aligning cushions, small rituals of control she did not bother to justify. She poured a glass of wine and drank it slowly, watching the light fade outside the window. Casserly looked peaceful. That was the most unsettling part. Hodge leapt onto the table, knocking a pen onto the floor. Careful, Agatha said automatically. Hodge ignored her. She watched him for a moment, then smiled faintly. At least some things, she thought, were honest about their indifference. The loose ends were tied with admirable efficiency. Melinda Tripp remained calm, according to Bill, cooperative in a way that unsettled everyone involved. She asked sensible questions. She thanked people for their time. She behaved as though the matter were a misunderstanding that would, in due course, be cleared up. She still believes she was right, Bill said when he told Agatha. That figures, Agatha replied. Self-righteousness is very soothing. She's awaiting trial, Bill continued. It may take months. Agatha felt no satisfaction at that. Delay, she knew, softened outrage. By the time anything happened, Casserly would have moved on completely, which she suspected was already happening. At the Red Lion, the conversation had drifted firmly into safer territory. Have you noticed the daffodils coming up early? The council's changed the bin schedule again. Roy Silver raised his glass toward Agatha. Congratulations. You've solved a murder and bored everyone simultaneously. That's my brand, Agatha said. Roy leaned closer. You're not enjoying this. No, Agatha said. I never do. You enjoy the chase, Roy said. Not the landing. She considered that. Possibly. Charles joined them, expression thoughtful. Villagers prefer conclusions to understanding. And people? Agatha asked. Charles smiled faintly. People prefer comfort. That evening, Agatha walked home slowly, letting the village pass around her. The windows glowed. Fires burned. Casserly looked exactly as it always had. She wondered briefly whether that was its greatest strength or its greatest flaw. At home, the house greeted her with familiar sounds, the tick of cooling metal, the faint hum of electricity, Hodge's unmistakable demand for attention. She fed him, then stood at the counter, suddenly unsure what to do next. There was no crisis to manage, no conversation to steer, no mystery demanding sharpness. She poured a glass of wine and carried it into the sitting room, settling into her chair. Hodge leapt up beside her, turned twice, and sat with deliberate closeness. You know, she said to him, They'll say everything's been sorted. Hodge blinked. It hasn't, Agatha continued. It's just been put back. Hodge yawned. She laughed softly. Yes, I know, that's life. The fire crackled, then settled. The house felt lived in again, not tense, not expectant. Agatha thought of Melinda, waiting calmly, of Harold, silenced by concern, of Carsley, relieved to have its routines back. She thought, too, of herself. She had not become kinder. She had not become gentler. She had not learned any uplifting lesson. What she had learned, perhaps, was to recognize the cost of comfort and to accept that truth, spoken sharply, was sometimes the only kindness available. Outside, the village slept. Inside, Hodge stretched, pressed closer, and purred. Agatha rested her head back and closed her eyes. Restored, she murmured, not repaired. Hodge, entirely uninterested in metaphors, purred louder. The kettle sighed quietly in the kitchen, cooling at last. And Agatha Raisin, for once, let things be exactly as they were. Agatha carried her tea into the sitting room and sat opposite Hodge. Carsley had moved on. It always did. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel comforted. She felt clear, restored. She murmured, watching Hodge knead the armchair, as if nothing in the world required explanation. Not repaired. The kettle cooled, the fire ticked.